So welcome back to the series Embracing Change. We also used to call it webinars, but today it's more of a workshop. Internally, we call it learning and development. So I want to welcome Danette, our Wellbeing Head, a dear friend for the last over 13 years, who's watched the inception from ideation to execution of this incredible, from our perspective, beautiful creation called Genetic Care. So thank you, Danette, for being along and a core part of the journey of building and co-creating this. And I'll let you take over from here, and we'll thank you towards the end.
Thank you, Faisal, and welcome everyone. It's going into evening where I am, so I am in Australia, for those of you who haven't met me before. I just a little bit, so you know a little bit about me. Weirdly, I'm an accountant by trade, so I have a finance background. Have always been interested in how we work with our brain. So I spend a lot of time explaining how we can work better in our life to have a calmer, more peaceful life and still achieve what we need to achieve. I have 5 children and raised all of them with my husband while we were running our first couple of businesses together. We still 26 years later have run businesses together, which is awesome. Have 2 grandchildren as well. And where we live in Australia, we have the most venomous snake in the world outside our back door. So that is part of the reason why I always wanted to learn to work with my brain so that I was protected in those instances. I'm going to encourage, if you've got questions, please ask as we go. And thank you for joining us today. So I suppose by way of starting with this, I'm going to just talk a little bit about your brain. And one of the reasons I like to share about the brain is because often we're not taught how to work with our brain. So we do the best we can, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work so well. And I've learned all of this the hard way. So I've tried and tested all of the stuff that we're going to talk about tonight, or today. It's tonight for me. So our brain, while it is a small part of our body's mass, uses somewhere between 20 to 25% of our body's energy. So that's measured through blood flow. So our brain's about 2% of our body's mass. So it is very energy hungry, which means that the brain likes to do a lot of things subconsciously so that we are not necessarily aware of it. So an example is, if you are doing a similar thing every day, often you'll probably find yourself going, I don't even remember doing that. For example, if you brush your teeth every day, sometimes you'll have to go, did I brush my teeth today? And you probably have, because it's sort of an automatic thing. When we have to use our brain, like you will be at the moment, that obviously chews more energy because we're becoming more conscious and having to use the front part of our brain where we're doing our thinking and our creativity. But I like to teach very briefly the 3 major components of the brain. So at the back of your neck is what we call the brain stem. And this is the part of your brain that does all of the automatic functioning. You're not sitting there listening to me, or standing there or walking and listening to me and going, breathe. Blood flow, please flow. And if you've eaten, please digest. If you had to think about all of those automatic functions, you wouldn't be able to do very much. So a lot of that happens without us being conscious. Now, this changes when we get stressed or come under pressure. And I'll come back to the brainstem. Either side of our brain is the part of the brain that is our primary function of the brain, which is our survival. So should we experience stress, or perhaps if you're at my farm walking out the back door and seeing one of the brown snakes, our brain basically goes, survival is paramount. And so we will either generally do fight, flight, freeze. Some people fawn, which means they faint. And afterwards we come together and do the 5th F, which is we flock. We tend to talk about the stress or what has happened. So this is really important, and thinking sometimes gets overridden because survival is paramount to our brain. The last part of our brain that is developed is the part that does the thinking and the creativity. And that part of our brain is where we use a lot of the conscious part of our brain. So it uses more of that blood flow. When you're nice and calm, which I hope you are at the moment, that blood flow will be shared in the optimal proportion for all three parts of the brain. And the moment our brain detects a threat or gets stressed, the blood flow changes. And what happens, and I'm going to ask a question here, is have you ever experienced perhaps maybe an exam, or perhaps you were asked to do public speaking where you knew the information, but in the moment you couldn't recall that information? I bet that's probably happened to most of us. And I'm about to explain why it happens. So the moment our brain detects a threat, our breathing changes. So we basically hold our breath or we shallow breathe. And that is a signal for the blood flow to go to survival over thinking. And that's why we find it hard to recall information when we get a bit stressed. And if you've ever been in an exam, looked at the first question, and gone, I don't know the answer, I can't remember the answer, the rest of the exam is harder. And you would often find when you leave the exam and you relax and you're talking to your friends, all of a sudden the answer comes to you to that question. And that's because as we relax, the blood flow goes back to the thinking part, because our brain has realized it's not a survival situation now. We can use all of the parts of our brain because the environment we're in is not a threatful one. So the moment you notice that your brain, you can't recall information, you're struggling to recall what you know, check in with your breath, because it's often automatically being changed. So we're holding it or we're shallow breathing. And we need to do the beautiful deep breathing. The moment we deep breathe, that signals to our brain it's safe, and it will start to send that blood flow back. Another beautiful thing, and I know I've shared it with a couple of you, is our brain doesn't know the difference between whether it's faking something or whether it's actually happening. So if we smile, that also signals to our brain that the environment we're in is safe, and it will send the blood flow back to the thinking part as well. If you're not feeling like smiling, imagine this as a pencil, putting it in your mouth like that forces a smile, and our brain again signals, okay, it's okay, and it will send that blood flow back. The reason I suggest a pencil, because if you're a bit tense and you're biting a pen, that could not be a good outcome. So always make sure it's something that's not going to break. Couple of other things to know about your brain, because again, it doesn't come with an owner's manual, is that each of our brains every minute receives an enormous amount of information through our five senses. And that mostly comes in subconsciously. So they reckon it's about 11 million bits of information. That's a lot of information. Now, our brain cannot give conscious attention to all of that. So what our brain does is it has a filtering system. So that filter takes the information that's coming in through the five senses in our subconscious brain, and it will filter for what does our brain need to give attention to. And that need is different for every single one of us, because our brain's filtering system is based on our values, our beliefs, our upbringing, our education, our work experience, etc. So it's based on all of the things that we've experienced in our life. And for every single one of us, that will be different. And this is why, if you've ever watched a movie where maybe there was a car accident or something in the movie and the police were interviewing people, you would often notice that each of the people they were interviewing was giving a slightly different understanding of what happened in the car accident. So their explanation would be different. And that's because literally for every single one of us, our brain is filtering out most of the information, and then based on our values, our belief, our education, so very specific to us, our brain takes all that information and filters it down to about 4 to 5 things chunks of information it'll pay conscious attention to each minute. And this is why, to work with our brain, we need to understand that literally everyone else we're meeting, their brain's going to focus on different things, not right or wrong, just different things. And this is where learning to be curious can actually make us smarter. There's a beautiful quote by a gentleman called Bill Nye. So he's a Nobel Prize-winning scientist. And his quote is, "Everyone you meet knows something you don't." And I love that, because when we become curious about, I know what I know, but I don't know what you know, if I listen to you, then suddenly I become smarter. Now, when we don't understand that each of our brains is filtering differently, so we're all seeing the world differently, sometimes we can react to that. And that obviously puts the stress hormones through our body, but it also often causes friction with ourselves and others. And as much as possible, if we want to work with our brain, it's when we're relaxed, it's when we're curious, and we are playful, joyful, we're enjoying the world. So some of the things that I wanted to share with you is that we often are brought up to do things. So there's a lot of rewards for doing and achieving things. And when we're working with our brain, actually, one of the things to understand is that our brain does its hard work, so the heavy lifting, not when you're doing things. So when most people get their best ideas is when they're on a holiday, when they're napping, when they're having a break. And so now we know that actually, when you have a break, when you have a nap, when you sleep, when you're relaxing, when you're perhaps going for a walk or a swim, you'll often notice that your brain gets new ideas. And the function of those breaks is actually, it allows our brain to take information that's in the sort of short-term conscious part and file it into the more long-term memory. And when it does that, it often makes new connections. If ever you've woken up in the middle of the night and you've been stumped on a problem and all of a sudden you've gone, bing, I've got the answer to that problem, that's because your brain has used the sleep to actually make those new connections. And so when we start to race, it actually tends to trigger the stress part of our brain rather than, which works against us, rather than when we're relaxed, we actually can access more of what's in our brain. So the first sort of big takeaway for me for you working with your brain and living a life that sort of is calmer and more peaceful is that slowing down literally does allow us to speed up, because when we slow down, our brain gets to file information, make new connections, and give us easier access to those answers. So if you like a break from time to time, I would encourage regular breaks. A couple of things you can do to work with your brain on top of that, and feel free to ask questions as we go too, and I know Jamie's going to share that with me, is that each of us are different. So I am a 4 a.m. my brain kicks in, always has since I was a young child. But that means for me, I usually am in bed by 8:30 at night. And that allows me to get a good full night's sleep. So when I wake up at 4 a.m., my brain is already ticking over and quite happy to come up with new ideas. Now, that's not everyone. So I know that some people love to stay out late and sleep late, and that's perfectly okay as well. If we want to work with our brain, when we're trying to do the heavy thinking or the stuff that's really important, if you can also work it with your body's energy, That just gives you more ease at coming up with answers to questions, to dealing with difficult situations, etc. I would imagine that all of you, when you've not had enough sleep, you'll notice it over time. You'll become, I use the word narky, which means you're just a bit snarly and a bit snappy because you haven't had enough sleep. And that means then we're not only good for ourselves, we're not good for ourselves, we're also not good with others as well. So if we want to turn up as the best version of ourselves, making sure that we have regular breaks, making sure that we get good sleep can help us. All of that helps work with our brain. Really, really important. Hydrate regularly, because when we don't, we start to notice that our brain doesn't function as well. It also comes down to what the physical health team would talk to you about is things like nutrition, movement as well. I've worked with Robin Sharma, who some of you may know, who wrote The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari, etc. And he used to talk to us about the 3 p.m. slump. So in the afternoon, when your body starts to just go a bit into the, I want to have a nap. And one of the things he always used to say is do the second wind workout, which is get up and move. Because once we're moving, the blood flow starts recirculating, which works with our body and our brain as well. So again, it can give us that energy so we can make good decisions. We can be the best version of ourselves. The thing I like about when we work with our brain is it literally makes us a better version of ourselves. So when we are working with our brain, we learn to be present. And your presence is the greatest gift you can give your loved ones, your friends, because it's such a thing that most people don't do anymore. Most people are rushing, they're on devices, and they miss the precious moments of each and every day. We don't need more things. What we need from one another is that beautiful gift of each other's presence. And so when we work with our brain, we are less likely to get distracted. We're better at being still with others and being still with ourselves to understand what's going on and what's working for us and what's not working for us. The other thing is knowing that we all have a different perspective, because our brain has funneled all of that information to a very tiny amount that it pays attention to. It's understanding that if I want to have a great life and live with more ease, be able to adapt better, then gathering more than my perspective is really important. I love the idea of I collaborate with others, I compete with myself. Because when I compete with others, that tends to trigger the threat response a little bit. And playing tennis and stuff like that, like I know Faisal loves to do, that's okay for the competition. When we basically go, I want to be a better version of myself tomorrow. So that's my competition. I just want to be a little bit better than yesterday, but I want to collaborate and bring the wisdom of all of those different perspectives. That helps make us smarter. The other thing I love about our brain is as we gather new perspectives, it can completely change how we see the world. Now, I'll share a story here. Many years ago, so I grew up with a father who grew up in the Depression. And so for my father, even though he's independently wealthy, and both my parents are independently wealthy, for him, there was never, ever enough. And I remember reading a book which changed my world. And it basically said, walk down any city street and look around you. There is so much wealth. But not every brain believes that. So when some brains filter, they don't see that. And that for me was, okay, I don't have to accept that belief that my father has, that there's never enough. I can change that belief because I've got new information. And that's why I love collaborating, because it expands the information that goes into my funnel and gives me new opportunities to reframe my current perspective. So for all of you, if there's something that's not quite working in your life, understanding currently what your beliefs are around that, and then maybe looking at who's got a belief that seems to be working better. Maybe that's something that we could plant into our brain to just help give us a more easeful life. A couple of other things. There's a thing that I've noticed when I'm coaching people. When we get very emotional, our language becomes more emotional too. And what I've noticed is when our language is strongly emotional, like it's a catastrophe, it's a disaster, it's amazing, it's extraordinary, all of those tend to bubble up and make our emotions sort of move, possibly too much. And so what I've learned is that actually a really beautiful life is often when my language is a lot more neutral, just a bit curious. So through asking questions, or rather than going, it's a disaster or a catastrophe, I'm like, okay, that's interesting. It's not quite working as I would like it to at the moment. But if I label it a disaster or catastrophe, it suddenly makes it harder to deal with versus, okay, it's interesting, something I've got to deal with, but I'm not amplifying the word. Same if it's super duper amazing, awesome. And if any of you have ever suffered buyer's remorse, meaning you went out and bought something, and then later on you thought, what was I thinking? That's because often in that heightened positive state with our language where it's really amplified, our brain is like it's on a natural drug high. And so it filters out any negative information. And it's only when we become calm and centered that we notice, oh, I missed that information, the more negative information about what I was buying. So we know that if we want to work really well with our brain, the calmer we are, which is why beautiful breath helps us to see more of the world in a more peaceful, curious manner. And this is why people like Dr. D, etc., will, if you've had sessions with them, talk about the breath, etc., because we know how important the breath is. And it's an area that science hasn't spent a lot of time studying until the last few years. And yet different types of breathing can change our state. For example, if we're scared, we'll either or shallow breathe, whereas if we're relaxed, we'll belly breathe. There's breath for curiosity, there's breath for joy. So even sometimes slightly changing our breath can give us different results, which again can help us to lead a better life. What else was I going to? Oh, a couple of things that are really important. Our brain loves to be connected to others. So when we don't feel connected, people will get lonely, and that's often not good for our health. So being able to connect with others is really important. And I live on a farm. I'm not at the farm at the moment, but I actually live on a farm where my nearest neighbour is 2 kilometres away. And that allows me to get out in nature regularly. Another thing that calms us is nature. We know that if you put your hands in soil, your brain will calm your body because it's like in cave people days where, we might have been gathering food, etc. Or we just know that if stuff's in soil, it's going to grow and it's going to be good for us. So there's some really simple things we can do to have a better life. So one of the points I wanted you to take away is a good life is not about doing more. It's often about slowing down and being present to what's around you. When we're present, we often are also grateful about what's around us as well. I'm curious, and I'm not sure whether you're able to use the chat box or not. Jamie might just give me a yes or a no in the
Yes, they can.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask a question then. I'm curious, and I'd love for people to share, what are the things that you do that help you stay calm when you start to feel stressed? What do you do? Okay, if no one answers, I just thought I'd check in with people. So one of the things I think is getting clear for each of us on what is it that helps you to remain calm under pressure. And some of you may not yet be able to do that. And, that's also part of the work that we do at Genetic Care. There are some really simple ways of coming back to that inner peace that for all of us just give us a better life. So slowing your breath obviously is a really beautiful one. The smiling that we talked about before. For me, I generally love to just get outside, take my shoes off and ground myself, just because that calms my central nervous system. I also love hugs. So I'll find my husband, or if my kids or grandkids are visiting, that's another thing that helps calm me. For each of you, it will be a slightly different thing. Some of them will be similar, some of them will be different. A way to build those for yourself is to, when you are calm, notice the things that make you clear-headed, make you curious, because they're the things that are really going to help you have that beautiful life. And I think when we get into that treadmill of doing and doing and doing, one of the things we miss is the magic of the moments. There are often the little things that we miss, and they are often the special things in our life, whether it's the touch of a loved one's hand in yours, whether it's just a hug, whether it's just sitting and enjoying the view that you've got, enjoying how wonderful life can be for all of us, your friends, your family. All of those can help. So one of the things I wanted to share was, how do we work with our brain to identify new opportunities? Now, these could be business opportunities, but they could just be new opportunities for you to expand in, whether it's hobbies, whether it's interests, or just meet or learn more about the people that you already know. So a couple of things that open our brain wide up. So what we know is under pressure, your brain will narrow the neural pathways and often get stuck on the issue. Now, the moment that happens, it's really hard to get out of that unless you do a couple of different things. And each of these will work separately. But if you've ever noticed that you've got stuck on something and you can't see a way out, couple of things will open your brain wide out. The first one is asking great questions. And a number of you will have experienced work with our experts where they've asked a question and you've gone, that's a great question. And what happens then is your brain is starting to look at all the things that are filed and try and make new connections. So Robin Sharma used to share a great question, which I always share with people. And it's called, what's the opportunity here? So when something's not working for you, you can get stuck in the problem and go, why doesn't this work for me? Or you can change the question, which will change the focus. So asking what's the opportunity here will open up the neural pathways. What's the possibilities here? Again, we'll keep that open. So I always say to people, capture good questions, because good questions actually help you keep your brain open. A wide open brain is a smart brain because it's collecting data from all sorts of sources. When it's shut down, we just get stuck. And that obviously puts the stress hormones through our body, not necessarily a great thing for any of us. Another thing that keeps our brain wide open is music. So we often notice that when kids learn music early on, they're often good at things like maths and STEM subjects, because to learn music, it uses pretty much all of our brains, all the different components of our brain. So music is a beautiful way of opening up your brain and giving you access to more information. So I encourage people to think of music that keeps their brain joyous and open and happy, and create a playlist. Because again, if you're stuck, starting to play music starts to open up your brain to give you access to new information. Some other things, reframing. So knowing that my perspective is a very filtered perspective of the world. Asking, all right, what would Faisal think in this instance? What would Jamie think in this instance? What would Trish think in this instance? All of those give me the idea to think from a slightly different perspective. And literally, the frame we have is based on that filtering. So when we take someone else's frame, we expand the frame that we look through the world at. And this is often why when you're having a conversation with someone or you read something and you go, oh, and that particular thing you've read opens up new possibilities for you. It's very difficult to take your perspective back to what it was before you learned that, because it expands how your brain interacts and thinks about the environment. So I often ask myself when I'm stuck, not only what's the opportunity here, but I think about people I know that have gone through hardship and have come out the other side. And I go, well, what would they have done in this instance? Because I know they've worked out ways to navigate that. And that allows me to expand or reframe my view of the world. And that absolutely helps me be able to navigate what we're doing. All right, so I'm going to stop now because there was a bit of a challenge with the the chat box, but I just want to check in. Have people got questions before I share a few more tools? Let's just see if anyone's, so people can put it in the question and answer box and I can see. Excellent. All right, so a couple of people, yes, said people, oh, I love that. Someone does ice baths and nature. That is awesome. That's another great way of working with our brain and making us feel more alive too. So thank you for sharing that. It looks like we're open. Okay, so can't use the chat box, but feel free to use the question and answer because I can see that that is actually working. So if you've got any questions, please feel free to put them in chat. And I've got it open now, so I'll be able to see that as we go as well. Oops, I made it too big then. Now, a couple of other things. Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. So what we do when we get stressed is we all have different coping mechanisms. And what those coping mechanisms can be, it can be food, it can, for some people, they over-exercise, some people they drink, they smoke, some people do drugs, some people have coping mechanisms that they can work with and they're healthy sometimes, but even the healthy ones become obsessive. It's learning that the calmer we get, we become more present. That allows us to become more intentional. And as we become more intentional, whatever the coping mechanism is that we deal with when we're stressed, we can then choose whether we, say, pick up that piece of food that we know is not going to be good for us, or whether we perhaps eat something a little bit healthier, like blueberries or something like that. So one of the things that happens when you're rushing is that your brain is going to run pretty much all of the stuff subconsciously. And that's where we will run those programs where we use our coping mechanisms, such as we eat, say, chocolate or something when we know that maybe we should be eating nuts or fruit or something instead. The moment we slow down, it allows us to be more intentional in the decisions that we make. And that again helps us have a life that works much better for us. So slowing down definitely helps us. And I can see here I love this. Can I give you some examples of neutral language? Yes, and I'm going to give you a website that can help as well. So if you haven't heard of the website Word Hippo, so word as in just word, but hippo like as in a hippopotamus, what that website does is you can type in any word and it'll give you a whole stack of synonyms, antonyms, definition, etc. So this afternoon, I was teaching a group about giving feedback, and we were talking about a lot of words can trigger people. For example, if we use the word to a partner, for argument's sake, and we say you're aggressive, that will often trigger most people. They're like, I'm not aggressive, or they'll get really angry at us. But if we use something like, you're really excited about that. Now, even excitement's not so neutral. Using words that show that, so aggressive could be seen as you're really focused. That's a bit more neutral than aggressive. So words that tend to, if you notice when you say them, so if I say catastrophe or disaster, I can sort of feel those triggering some chemical reactions in me, even just because they are more amplified in their how I perceive them. Whereas if I often say to my clients, it's not good or bad, it just is what it is. And that's a little bit more neutral. So using tools like Word Hippo can help you to find words that perhaps don't trigger you and hopefully won't trigger other people as well. So you'll often notice there's another phenomenon that I see as a coach is that when we are nice and calm and curious, we can ask questions. So particular words will trigger people because we all believe that we all define these words exactly the same. And I'll give you an example here. The word respect for a lot of people is a trigger word. And people will get triggered, that person didn't show me respect. And the first question I always ask is, what is your definition of respect? And people just go, well, it means respect. Because in their brain, they haven't thought about the filtering thing that says that definition of respect has come from my parents, etc. So I'll give you an example. My best friend Susan and I, when we catch up for coffee, I will say to Susan, let's meet at 10:30. Now, in my family, respect equals being early or worst, being on time. My best friend Susan, her family has no interest in time really. When they think of respect, their definition is around being very present once you turn up to something. So I used to say to Susan, let's meet at 10:30, and then at 10:30, she's not there because I'm there at 25 past 10. Steam starts coming out. And then I was like, Danette, that's your definition. It comes from your father. Susan's definition is different. And then I went, oh, that's my definition of respect. It's not she's disrespecting me. She's just got a different definition. So our language can create lots of stress because we forget that every single person has slightly different definitions for particular words. So even words like love, commitment, etc., all of those will have slightly different definitions. And if we're having friction with someone else, trying to understand and be curious about what's your definition for this word helps us identify that maybe we're talking the same word, but actually we're meaning two different things. And if we don't work that up, we tend to have more friction. But if we're curious and go, oh, your definition is very different from mine, it's not right or wrong. It's good to understand each other's definition because that now expands my definition of what possibly that word could mean. So I hope that helps as well. I sort of added that to the neutral language. Yeah, I love that. Yeah. So when people feel stressed, they often will forget to remember to do what they know they should do. And that's why the sooner we can breathe and get calm again, our brain comes back and we can remember to do those things that are really good for us. I was listening to a diary of the CEO the other day, and one of the guys that he was interviewing, he said a really simple hack to sort of calm yourself pretty quickly. And I love this is to go, so 2 short breaths in, then a slow breath out, because the slow breath out signals to our brain that it's okay. And it tends to send the blood flow back here. And I love that, you know, if you get stressed, taking a break, taking some time to breathe, hydrating, eating some good healthy food, just moving, all of that helps work with the brain versus against it. And absolutely, and I'm just looking in the Q&A and just sharing some of the ideas here, meditation totally helps. I love this one about connection with the brain and procrastination. Procrastination often happens because something appears harder than our brain wants to cope with. And I'll give you an example here. If you've ever made a big New Year's resolution, so you maybe don't exercise so much, and all of a sudden you've decided this year I'm going to run a marathon. What we'll see in most people is day one, they'll get up and they'll start walking and maybe do a bit of running and they feel really good. Day two, it's a bit slower. Day three, they hit snooze on their alarm clock. And what we know is our brain doesn't like big change. So when it becomes big, our brain goes, oh, I don't want to give that much energy. I'd rather do what I normally do, which is why we tend to revert back to our old habits. There's a great concept called the 1% growth, and it comes to this bit about procrastination as well. If we work on ourselves 1% a day, doesn't seem like much each day, but what it does over time is like compound interest. So when you invest money, looks like this, it looks like this, and then suddenly that compounding effect happens and it takes off. If you invest and grow 1% a day for 12 months, you're nearly going to be 37 times different in 12 months' time. So when we take on something big, it's like eating the elephant. They say, eat it one bite at a time. When we're dealing with some stuff, the reason we're procrastinating is our brain is overwhelmed. So if we can break it down to smaller chunks, our brain is more likely to go, okay, I can do that. And this is also where you can talk to other people because they might give you hacks that help you move forward on the particular thing that you're procrastinating on as well. And I like the next question. How do you deal with anxiety? And part of anxiety is our body is reacting, whether it's internal to what we're thinking or what's going on around us. And again, slowing our breath can help. Now, obviously, sometimes there is other work that's happening. So it could be that there's perhaps trauma from previous generations. There could be trauma now. There are a whole stack of things we can do to support anxiety. And certainly, as you suggested in there, being more present allows us to check in with what is our body trying to tell us, what is coming up. And sometimes we'll need professional help to be able to navigate that, to be able to get to the point where we can, you know, work really well with our anxiety. Being curious about it, I think helps, and certainly working with experts can help. I also think just asking your body, what's this coming up for? What's the signal? What are you trying to tell me? Can also just start to get you used to just sitting with your body and being okay with sometimes that anxiety is just trying to say, maybe there's something that needs to change for me. Maybe something's not quite working for me. I love that box breathing there as well. Yeah, and being able to differentiate words, I think, is super, super helpful if we're going to work with our body and our brain. Now, let me just see how we're going. Excellent. Now, a couple of other things to identify new opportunities before I go to some really practical techniques. When I talked about reframing, I love a phrase that Oprah uses, and I reckon this can help all of us. And that particular phrase is, when stuff's not working for me, or maybe I'm driving the car and I've managed to get lost, she has this beautiful phrase, which is, I'm right where I'm meant to be. And the moment I say that phrase to my brain, I take a deep breath and I go, okay, there's some reason I'm here. Just come back to being present and see what it is. And often the next street I hit is the one I'm supposed to be on. But if I don't slow myself down using that phrase or breathing, then I often get more frantic and get more lost. So using a phrase, I like this one of Oprah, I'm right where I'm meant to be, but a phrase that works for you, that reminds you that you've got this, that whatever you're experiencing is what it's meant to be, often I think for our growth. Many of my friends go, oh, I've got space in my life. And I'm going, oh, that's interesting because I reckon you're about to level up to the next level. Don't try and fill lots of space with things if you want to grow to that next level. Giving a little bit of space allows you to experience things that I think give you new perspectives, new insights that help you level up as well. Obviously, journaling, reflection can help as well. Sometimes too, I think to spot new opportunities, things like travel, going to a new environment can just open up new possibilities for our brain. And the big one that I think we don't use often enough is talking to others. So collaborating and working with others. Because often, whether it's business, whether it's a home problem, relationship problem, talking to others gives us those different perspectives that are filtered by every single person that allows us to see more opportunities than if we were just dealing with something by ourselves. So making sure that to work with your brain, you allow it to be curious and to work with other people's brains as well. Now, just want to check in. Any questions about identifying new opportunities before we go to some practical techniques to help you be the best version of you? I'm just going to check if anyone's got any questions. No? Okay. All right. Well, I will continue, but feel free to add questions as we go because I'll come back to them at the end. So I would say a lot of the things that help you be the best version of yourself are often simple. Doesn't mean it's easy, however. So they're simple as in that they don't require lots of money, lots of time, etc. However, you have to slow down enough to put them in place. And the first one that helps us be the best version of ourselves is our breath. Because the moment we slow our breath, we work with our brain because it sends the blood flow back so we can use the thinking, the creative side of our brain. Anything like meditation, yoga, going for a walk, going for a run, having a swim, those ice baths, etc. All of those help us to slow down our breathing. Although the ice bath, when you first jump in, it's like, but then we learn to breathe to be able to stay in that discomfort. So breathing is a really important one. Being curious, knowing that the moment your brain becomes judgmental, it's actually shutting down what you're seeing in the world. So the moment our brain gets triggered by judgment, etc., fear, it actually narrows what we see because in full threat mode, our brain is entirely just focused on survival. If we want to be smart, we need to be relaxed. We need to be playful. And that often goes against what we were taught at things like school. So at school, kids used to get, certainly when I was at school, which my children say was, when I'm as old as dirt, pretty much, my kids say to me. And at school, if kids sort of started to move or whatever, they used to get in trouble. If they were having fun, they used to get in trouble because we were supposed to sit still, be quiet and concentrate. Now, the moment we concentrate, we frown, we sort of trigger a little bit of that threat response. So if you've got kids, if you are a kid, I'm certainly sure you were a kid at some stage, you've got grandkids, if you want to help them be better in terms of study and things like that, actually helping them to relax before they start studying actually works better with their brains. Now, we have a lot of neurodiversity, and so different techniques work with different kids. The more that we can help all kids relax, it helps them to be able to work with their brain versus against them. And for us as adults, it's exactly the same. The more relaxed we are, the better we work with our brain. A couple of other things. And it comes back to that Bill Nye quote that I used earlier about everyone you meet knows something you don't. We're not taught how to listen properly. So when we listen, we often listen to reply. The problem with listening to reply is you're not present because you're actually thinking about what you need to say next. The better way to listen, because it actually helps you make you smarter, because you start to understand other people's perspectives, is to listen to understand. And they call that active listening often. And to listen to understand, all you have to do is be present. Whatever the other person is saying, you just sit with that. You let it just come in. And when you are nice and present, you'll notice not only what they've said, but you will often tap into your intuition about what they're not saying as well. So stuff might bubble up where you go, oh, I'm curious, this is also coming up for me. And they're, oh, how did you know that? And it's often because we're so calm and centered. We're not just tapping into the brain in our head. We've also got a brain in our heart. We've got brain cells in our heart and our gut. So that allows us to tap into more, not just of what's said, but what's not said. And when you listen to understand another person, you give them your full attention, your presence. That is such a gift. And you never know when that might change another person's life. So I always encourage us to slow down, to listen, to understand. We talked earlier about understanding that people use a lot of abstract words. When we can understand the definition and also change words that might be abstract but are like aggressive or passive and stuff like that, where they're likely to trigger people, to create more neutral words, that again also works with our brain and the other person's brain as well. Now, if you find yourself interrupting people because you want to rush them through things or you're feeling busy, there is a beautiful acronym that I learned when I did my coaching qualifications. And the word is WAIT. And WAIT stands for, why am I talking? So if you find you're interrupting others, and part of what you want is to be more intentional with others and not interrupt, maybe writing WAIT on your hand and remembering, why am I talking, is a really good skill, again, to create those rich conversations and that better connection with your loved ones and your friends. The other thing I love when we're working with our brain is it allows us to be more expansive. When our brain is a little bit shut off because maybe we're stuck on a problem or we're a bit fearful, we will tend to reply to other people's ideas with no but. So we shut off the possibility of that idea. When we're more expansive, the beautiful phrase yes and builds on an idea. So you can build on another person's idea and not go, that person's wrong, but actually go yes and, yes and, yes and. Again, that creates ideas that probably, if there's two of us, we wouldn't have had by ourselves. And that's why working with others, collaborating with others, makes us smarter, because they're seeing different things, because their brain, again, is filtering different information to what our brain is filtering. The thing that I think is most important for all of us is that we stop letting our brain beat itself up. So our brain will often speak to ourselves when we make a mistake in worse language than we would ever use with our worst enemy. So we'll go, oh, you're so stupid. I can't believe you made that decision, or I can't believe you made that mistake. And really what we need, if we want to work best with our brain, is to be kind to ourselves, to be compassionate to ourselves, because it's really hard to be kind and compassionate to others if we haven't practiced it on ourselves. The moment we're kind and compassionate on ourselves, our brain stays open. When we start beating ourselves up, and it's often happens subconsciously, and all of a sudden you'll tune in and your brain's going, oh, what an idiot are you, etc., etc. Catch that, because the moment you can only change once you become aware. Once you hear that, you go, you know what? You're doing the best you can. You've got this. Or you can say, I've got this. And know that every single one of us are doing the best we can. And if we can realize that in ourselves, we can also then encourage that in others. And that makes for better relationships, better problem solving, because we're working with each other's brains. The other thing I'd say is sometimes stuff will come up that triggers your brain, and it's work that we need to do ourselves. So I know if I get triggered, I've got work to do. Now, I'm lucky because I am Wellbeing Head. I have access to these beautiful experts at Geneticare that can help me with my inner work. And I know a number of you have that access as well. Don't suffer through your triggers. Don't suffer when you get stuck on problems. The more we can reach out and work with others, it gives us tried and tested solutions faster. None of us are meant to suffer. If we can work with others and get solutions, that will help us move forward. So I'm just about at the end of what I wanted to share, and I do want to check if we've got questions sort of at the end, but I suppose my takeaways for you today are really to work with your brain. Don't rush through life. The calmer and more present you are, the more intentional your life is. An intentional life means you focus on what's important for you. By breathing, by doing exercise, by hydrating, by eating well, by surrounding yourself with people, by asking great questions, by taking time out, etc. All of those help us work with our brain. If we're stuck or we want to see new opportunities, questions are a great way to get there. Using things like music playlists to keep our brain open. Using that phrase that Oprah had, I'm right where I'm meant to be, to go, okay, just be present, breathe, and see what possibilities are in front of us. But most of all, remembering that every day we have an opportunity to learn and grow. And the more curious we are, because we're calm, our language is neutral, we're able to easily go through each day. Now, I raised 5 children while running a business with my husband. Our life was often chaotic, and yet I set my intention every morning to be kind and loving. And that meant that even when it seemed chaotic, if I started to notice I was getting a bit frantic, I would go, Danette, what's that intention? I'll breathe, be kind and loving. And that meant that I wasn't always perfect, because none of us are perfect. And I have these beautiful children now that work with me in our business, because they enjoyed the experience of growing up with us and then working with us. Even though they swore when they were children they wouldn't work in our business, they went and worked for others and then came back and went, you're a good employer. So I think when we become more intentional and present, we work with our brain, we create a life that when we get to our last day, we can look back on and go, that was a life well lived, and the impact I had was something that I intended to have. Versus if we're really frantic, sometimes we have impact on ourselves and others, which is not the intention and not what we want. So, any questions? And I want to say thank you, everyone, because you've been a great audience, and I can see, thank you. Okay, how many times I've thought to myself saying, yep, how stupid, exactly. And I've said it, but we can catch ourselves and correct it. So I love that. Excellent. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Danette, for that incredible, calm sharing. That's the lesson that we all need to learn, that you packed in so much, but in such a calm manner. And I think that's right there, just that experience speaks for itself. You've got, okay, I don't know. Yeah. Okay, everybody's just saying thank you. So thank you, everyone, for taking the time to be here, and hope to see you next month. We will be doing these on a regular basis. And thank you, Danette, for all of that and just taking the time. I know we're both in the same city, so we're both going to have dinner soon.
That connection, very important.